our channel. They say history is written by the victors, but when it comes to England's most famous queen, the truth is far more complicated. Queen Elizabeth I ruled for 44 years, shaping an empire and defying expectations, but beneath the golden age of her reign lay dark secrets, ruthless rivalries, and heartbreaking betrayals. What really happened behind the closed doors of her court? And what was the shocking discovery hidden among her belongings after her death? Stay tuned as we uncover the untold truth about the Virgin Queen, childhood and family background after Queen Elizabeth I's death. Her counselors searched through her personal belongings, sifting through the artifacts of a life that had defined an era. But among the jewels, documents, and relics of her reign, they found something unexpected, a letter, buried deep within her possessions. When they read its contents, their blood ran cold. What could have been so shocking, even after her passing? Stay with us as we uncover the truth about England's most legendary queen, starting from the very beginning. Elizabeth's story begins in scandal, one so immense that it forever altered the course of England's history. Born on September 7, 1533, she was the daughter of King Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn, the woman who had captivated the king and caused one of the most controversial breakups in European history. Henry's desire to marry Anne led him to defy the Catholic Church, divorcing his first wife, Catherine of Aragon, and sparking the English Reformation, a seismic shift that severed England's ties with Rome and reshaped the nation's religious landscape. But Elizabeth's arrival was not the triumphant event Anne had hoped for. Henry had moved heaven and earth to be with her, yet instead of the longed-for male heir, and gave birth to a daughter. This was a devastating blow. Though she remained queen, Anne's position at court became increasingly precarious. She was walking a tightrope, and one misstep could send her plummeting into ruin. That misstep came in 1536, when Henry, impatient for a son and enamored with a new mistress, Jane Seymour, turned against Anne. In a rapid and brutal downfall, Anne was arrested, accused of adultery, treason, and even incest, charges many historians believe were fabricated to justify her removal. On May 19, 1536, she was executed by a French swordsman at the Tower of London, her last words expressing devotion to the very king who had condemned her. Elizabeth, barely over 2 years old, had lost her mother in the most public and brutal way possible. But her suffering didn't end there. Almost immediately, she was declared illegitimate, stripped of her title as princess, and removed from the line of succession. Practically overnight, the daughter of a queen became, in the eyes of the court, nothing more than Lady Elizabeth, a forgotten child, overshadowed by her father's desperate pursuit of a male heir. If Elizabeth hoped for stability, she wouldn't find it in her father's ever-changing affections. Just 11 days after Anne Boleyn's execution, Henry married Jane Seymour, his third wife. Unlike Anne, Jane was meek and obedient, exactly the kind of queen Henry wanted after the turbulence of his second marriage. A year later, she gave birth to a son, Edward, finally granting Henry the male heir he had long desired. Jane's death from childbirth complications meant Elizabeth would never know her stepmother, but it also marked a shift in her status. With a brother in the picture, Elizabeth became even more of an afterthought. Her early years were shaped by the instability of Henry VIII's court, where queens came and went like the changing seasons. After Jane Seymour's death, Henry would go on to marry 3 more times, Anne of Cleves, Catherine Howard, who was executed just like Anne Boleyn, and finally, Catherine Parr, the woman who would play a critical role in Elizabeth's upbringing. But Elizabeth had already learned a harsh lesson before reaching her 5th birthday. In the ruthless world of Tudor politics, love was conditional, power was fleeting, and survival meant playing the long game. This was the foundation on which England's greatest queen was built. And as we'll see, the trials of her childhood were only the beginning. Education and early challenges. Elizabeth I wasn't just a queen, she was a survivor. Before she ever sat on the throne, she endured betrayal, political manipulation, and personal danger, all while receiving an education that would make her one of the most intelligent and cunning monarchs in history. But intelligence alone wasn't enough to secure her future. Elizabeth had to navigate a world where every misstep could mean death, and nowhere was that more apparent than in the household of her stepmother, Catherine Parr. By the age of 12, Elizabeth had already demonstrated an extraordinary intellect. She wasn't just learning languages, she was mastering them. When she translated her stepmother Catherine Parr's book, Prayers or Meditations, into Italian, Latin, and French, it wasn't a simple academic exercise. It was a strategic move. Elizabeth knew her father, Henry VIII, valued intelligence in his children, but more than that, she understood the power of presentation. By giving him this translation, she wasn't just showing off her skills, she was proving that she was more than an afterthought in the Tudor line. Henry had disowned her once before, stripping her of her title after her mother's execution. If she wanted to secure her place, she had to remind him of her worth. And it worked. Henry, despite his ever-changing affections, began to recognize Elizabeth's potential. He ensured she received the finest education possible. Under the guidance of renowned tutors like Roger Ascham, Elizabeth studied subjects far beyond what was typical for noblewomen of the time. She delved into philosophy, rhetoric, history, and theology. She could debate theological doctrines with bishops, analyze political strategies like a seasoned diplomat, and write with a precision that rivaled scholars twice her age. By the time she completed her schooling, she wasn't just considered well-educated, she was one of the most brilliant minds of her era. But academic brilliance couldn't shield her from the dangers of the Tudor court. In 1547, Henry VIII died, leaving his 9-year-old son, Edward VI, as king. Elizabeth, just 13 years old, was now fatherless and politically vulnerable. Her fate rested in the hands of her stepmother, Catherine Parr, the one wife of Henry's who had managed to survive marriage to him. Catherine had always been fond of Elizabeth and took her in, but the household was not the safe haven it should have been. Shortly after Henry's death, Catherine shocked the court by secretly marrying Thomas Seymour, the ambitious and reckless brother of the Lord Protector, Edward Seymour. This marriage would prove disastrous, especially for Elizabeth. Thomas Seymour was charming, power-hungry, and utterly dangerous. As the king's uncle, he had hoped to wield influence over young Edward VI, but when that failed, he set his sights on another route to power, Elizabeth. What followed was one of the most disturbing chapters of Elizabeth's early life. Thomas, a man in his 40s, began behaving inappropriately toward the teenage princess. He would enter her room early in the morning, dressed in nothing but his nightgown, and tickle her as she lay in bed. At times, he even smacked her on the backside, laughing it off as harmless fun. But it wasn't harmless. It was predatory. Even more shocking was Catherine Parr's response, or rather, her lack of one. Instead of stopping her husband's behavior, she enabled it. On at least 2 occasions, she even joined in, holding Elizabeth while Seymour tickled her. Historians debate Catherine's motives. Was she blinded by love for Seymour? Did she convince herself it was innocent play? Or did she suspect something darker but fear confronting it? The situation escalated to a terrifying level. In one particularly alarming incident, Catherine walked in on Seymour embracing Elizabeth. Whether it was an innocent hug or something more, we will never know. But Catherine's reaction was immediate. She sent Elizabeth away. This exile may have saved Elizabeth's life. Mere months after Elizabeth was removed from the household, Catherine Parr died in childbirth. And with his wife out of the way, Thomas Seymour returned his focus to Elizabeth. Now widowed, he began plotting to marry the young princess. If he succeeded, he would have had a direct path to the throne. But Seymour had overplayed his hand. His erratic behavior, breaking into the king's chambers, conspiring against his own brother, and attempting to manipulate royal marriages, had drawn too much attention. The royal council had had enough. In 1549, Seymour was arrested and charged with treason. Elizabeth, barely 15 years old, was now in serious danger. If Seymour confessed that she had been part of his schemes, she could be implicated in treason, a crime punishable by death. When she was interrogated, Elizabeth did something extraordinary. She outmaneuvered her interrogators. She denied any involvement, chose her words carefully, and refused to be trapped. Even at her young age, she understood how dangerous a single misplaced sentence could be. In the end, Seymour's reckless ambition sealed his fate. He was executed on March 20, 1549. As he faced the scaffold, he reportedly said, "He who climbs too high is sure to fall." Elizabeth, however, had learned a different lesson: trust no one, reveal nothing, and always stay one step ahead. Elizabeth's teenage years were marked by danger, manipulation, and near misses with death. She had already seen how quickly a queen could fall. Her mother's fate had taught her that. Now, she had first-hand experience with how men in power could use and discard women for their own gain. But unlike Anne Boleyn, Elizabeth wouldn't be anyone's pawn. Her time in Catherine Parr's household left scars, but it also gave her the political instincts she would need to survive. She had learned the value of silence, the necessity of keeping her emotions hidden, and the power of knowledge. She had also seen the dangers of marriage up close, something that would shape her decision to remain unmarried for the rest of her life. By the time Elizabeth emerged from this chapter of her life, she was no longer just the forgotten daughter of a disgraced queen. She was a player in the dangerous game of Tudor. And as history would soon prove, she was a player who would not be defeated. The battle for the throne. The road to Elizabeth I's throne was paved with treachery, shifting alliances, and near-death experiences. After years of political turmoil, betrayals, and brutal executions, she emerged victorious, but not without scars. The battle for the crown wasn't just about power, it was about survival. And for Elizabeth, survival meant playing the long game. On July 6, 1553, the fragile stability of England shattered. King Edward VI, just 15 years old, succumbed to illness, leaving the throne without a clear and uncontested heir. As Henry VIII's only surviving son, Edward had been expected to continue the Protestant Reformation his father had started. But his death threw the kingdom into disarray. In theory, the next in line should have been his eldest sister, Mary Tudor, followed by Elizabeth. But Edward VI had other plans. Before his death, he named Lady Jane Grey, his Protestant cousin, as his successor, deliberately bypassing both of his half-sisters. This wasn't just a matter of personal preference, it was a desperate attempt to prevent England from falling back into Catholic rule under Mary. Jane Grey was an intelligent and well-educated noblewoman, but she was also a political pawn. She hadn't schemed for the throne, her ambitious father-in-law, John Dudley, Duke of Northumberland, had. The moment Edward's death was announced, Northumberland rushed to install Jane as queen, proclaiming her rule on July 10, 1553. For 9 days, England had a different queen. But the problem? Hardly anyone supported her. Mary Tudor wasn't about to let herself be cast aside. Unlike Jane, she had the people's support, especially in the northern and eastern counties, where Catholicism remained strong. When Mary declared herself the rightful queen and began rallying her forces, support for Jane crumbled almost instantly. Elizabeth, meanwhile, found herself in a precarious position. Although she was Protestant like Jane, she was still Henry VIII's daughter and had more claim to the throne than Jane ever did. Siding with Jane could have been a death sentence if Mary won. But rejecting Jane too soon could have made Elizabeth a target if Mary lost. So, in a brilliant political maneuver, Elizabeth stalled. She waited to see which side had the upper hand before making her move. And when it became clear that Mary had overwhelming support, Elizabeth officially threw in her lot with her sister. On July 19, 1553, Jane Grey was deposed. Mary was victorious. Mary's entrance into London was a grand spectacle. Cheering crowds lined the streets, bells rang out across the city, and England officially had its first ruling queen. Jane Grey, once a reluctant monarch, was imprisoned in the Tower of London. But this wasn't the triumphant reunion of two royal sisters. Mary and Elizabeth were never truly allies. Mary and Elizabeth may have shared the same father, but their worlds couldn't have been more different. Mary, the daughter of Catherine of Aragon, was a devout Catholic. She had spent her childhood watching her mother suffer after Henry VIII divorced her, and she had never forgiven him, or Anne Boleyn, for it. Mary saw Catholicism as the true faith and viewed the Protestant Reformation as heresy. Elizabeth, on the other hand, was the daughter of Anne Boleyn, the woman Mary despised. Elizabeth had been born into Protestantism and had been raised with the understanding that the old Catholic ways were fading. Even beyond religion, Elizabeth's very existence was an insult to Mary. She was a reminder of the woman who had dethroned Mary's mother and turned England upside down. Their rivalry was more than political, it was deeply personal. Mary had always refused to acknowledge Elizabeth as legitimate. In her eyes, Elizabeth wasn't just a Protestant threat, she was the daughter of a mistress, a usurper's child who had no right to royal status. The tension between them was worsened by rumors surrounding Mary's husband, King Philip of Spain. Philip, a powerful Catholic monarch, was said to have considered marrying Elizabeth if Mary failed to produce an heir. Whether this was true or just court gossip, it planted a dangerous seed of paranoia in Mary's mind. And soon, that paranoia would nearly cost Elizabeth her life. Mary's reign quickly spiraled into bloodshed. Determined to restore Catholicism, she launched a ruthless persecution of Protestants, burning hundreds at the stake. This earned her the infamous nickname, Bloody Mary. But Mary wasn't just worried about Protestants, she was worried about Elizabeth. In 1554, a Protestant rebellion known as Wyatt's Rebellion broke out, aiming to overthrow Mary. The rebellion was led by Sir Thomas Wyatt, but whispers spread that Elizabeth was involved in the plot. Whether or not she actually was remains uncertain, but Mary was convinced. Elizabeth was arrested and thrown into the Tower of London. For 3 months, her life hung by a thread. She knew exactly what happened to traitors, she had watched her own mother go to the execution block. Now, she was locked in the same prison, waiting for her fate to be decided. Mary's advisors urged her to execute Elizabeth. As long as Elizabeth lived, they argued, Protestant forces would always have hope. Eliminating her would secure Mary's rule. But executing Elizabeth wasn't so simple. Elizabeth was popular, even among some Catholic nobles. Killing her could spark a bigger rebellion than Wyatt's. In the end, Elizabeth's powerful allies within Mary's court managed to convince the Queen to spare her. Instead of execution, Elizabeth was placed under house arrest in the countryside. It was a victory, but not a comfortable one. Elizabeth spent years in uncertainty, always aware that one wrong move could bring her back to the Tower. Elizabeth's reign and marriage scandals. For a 16th-century monarch, marriage wasn't just about love, it was about securing alliances, producing an heir, and solidifying power. For a queen, it was even more critical. In the eyes of her council, nobles, and foreign rulers, a woman ruling alone was unnatural. A husband would bring stability, strength, and, most importantly, a future king, but Elizabeth had other plans. Despite relentless pressure to wed, she remained single for life, crafting an image of herself as the Virgin Queen, devoted solely to England. It was a radical choice, and one that came at a personal cost. If Elizabeth ever came close to marriage, it was with Robert Dudley, the man she loved, but could never have. Dudley wasn't just another nobleman, he was Elizabeth's childhood friend and closest confidant. Handsome, charming, and ambitious, he held a special place in the Queen's heart. From the moment she became queen, he was always by her side, rising rapidly in status and influence. But there was one problem: Dudley was already married. His wife, Amy Robsart, was suffering from a long-term illness, believed to be breast cancer. At court, people whispered that it was only a matter of time before she died, clearing the way for Elizabeth and Dudley to be together. Then, in September 1560, something shocking happened. Amy Robsart was found dead at the bottom of a staircase. The official cause? An accident. But no one believed it. Her death was far too convenient, and rumors exploded across England. Did Dudley arrange to have her murdered so he could marry the Queen? Did Elizabeth know about it? Or was it truly just a tragic accident? If there had been any chance of her marrying Dudley before, it was now impossible. The public wouldn't accept a queen's wedding to a man suspected of killing his own wife. Even Elizabeth's closest advisers warned her, if she married Dudley, England would turn against her. So, with a broken heart but a sharp mind, Elizabeth let Dudley go. She refused to marry him, knowing that doing so could cost her the throne, but letting go of marriage didn't mean letting go of Dudley. He remained one of the most powerful men in her court, holding titles, influence, and a permanent place in her inner circle. However, even that relationship would be tested in the years to come. Elizabeth may not have married Dudley, but that didn't mean she wanted anyone else to have him. For nearly 2 decades, Dudley remained at her side, seemingly devoted to her alone. But in 1578, everything changed. Dudley secretly married another woman, and not just any woman, but Lettice Knowles, Elizabeth's distant cousin and a woman who looked strikingly like the Queen herself. When Elizabeth found out, she was furious. This wasn't just betrayal, it was a personal insult. Elizabeth banished Lettice from court, vowing never to forgive her. She refused to speak her name and never acknowledged the marriage as long as she lived. Lettice became known as the one woman who had dared to steal the Queen's favorite. Despite this, Elizabeth never fully abandoned Dudley. Even after his marriage, he remained in her favor, though their relationship was forever changed. Elizabeth's decision not to marry became one of the most defining aspects of her reign. She could have taken a husband. Suitors lined up from all over Europe, including King Philip II of Spain, Archduke Charles of Austria, and even the French Duke of Anjou. Each match could have secured England's position on the world stage. Yet, Elizabeth turned them all down. Perhaps it was the trauma of her childhood. She had watched her own mother, Anne Boleyn, be executed by her father. She had seen her stepmothers cast aside, one by one, either through divorce, disgrace, or death. Marriage, for Elizabeth, wasn't security, it was a trap. If she married, she would be expected to submit to her husband. In a world where women were seen as weak, Elizabeth refused to let any man rule over her. Or on some level, she had loved only one man, Robert Dudley, and after him, no one else would do. Whatever the reason, her refusal to marry became part of her legend. Poets and writers compared her to goddesses and saints. She became Gloriana, the divine ruler untouched by mortal men. She was good Queen Bess, the mother of her nation. Her people believed she was married to England itself. And in the end, that choice gave her absolute control over her throne. She had sacrificed love for power, but in doing so, she became one of the greatest monarchs in history. And long after her death, the world still asks, did she ever regret it? Rivalry with Mary, Queen of Scots. Few rivalries in history are as dramatic, personal, and politically charged as the one between Elizabeth I of England and Mary, Queen of Scots. These two powerful women, both granddaughters of Henry VII, should have been allies. Instead, they became deadly enemies. Their battle wasn't fought on a battlefield, but in secret letters, political schemes, and betrayals that spanned decades. In the end, only one queen would survive. 2 queens, 2 religions, 1 throne. From the moment Elizabeth I ascended the throne in 1558, her reign was threatened by one person above all others, Mary, Queen of Scots. Mary was everything Elizabeth was not, a Catholic queen in a Protestant world, a woman who married and had a son, while Elizabeth remained unmarried, a ruler with a strong claim to the English throne, one that many considered stronger than Elizabeth's. For Catholic Europe, Elizabeth was a heretic, an illegitimate daughter of Anne Boleyn who had no right to rule. But Mary? She was the rightful Catholic heir, the queen who could restore England to Rome. To Elizabeth, Mary wasn't just a rival, she was a living threat to her throne and her life. At first, Elizabeth tried to control Mary rather than destroy her. She proposed a bold idea: Mary should marry Robert Dudley, Elizabeth's favorite courtier and closest friend. This wasn't about love. It was a calculated move. If Mary married Dudley, Elizabeth would have a trusted ally at Mary's side, keeping her in check. But there was one problem: neither Mary nor Dudley was interested. Mary, ambitious and headstrong, saw Dudley as beneath her status. Instead, she made a reckless decision. She married Henry Stuart, Lord Darnley, a man who also had Tudor blood and a claim to the English throne. This was a huge mistake. At first, the marriage seemed perfect, two Catholic royals with a legitimate claim to England. But soon, Darnley proved to be a disaster. He was arrogant, violent, and dangerously unpredictable. Then, in 1567, scandal erupted. Darnley was found murdered, his house blown up, his strangled body left in the garden, and the prime suspect? Mary's new lover, the Earl of Bothwell. What did Mary do next? She married Bothwell. To the world, it looked like she had plotted her own husband's murder to be with another man. Whether that was true or not, the damage was done. Mary's reputation was ruined, and her enemies seized the moment. The Scottish nobles turned against her, forcing her to abdicate the throne. Her baby son, James VI, was crowned king, and Mary was imprisoned. But she wouldn't stay locked up for long. In 1568, Mary escaped from captivity and fled to England, begging her cousin Elizabeth for protection. This was the moment Elizabeth had feared. If she helped Mary, she risked angering the Protestant nobles of Scotland and allowing a Catholic queen to regain power. If she sent Mary away, she would lose control over her greatest rival. Elizabeth chose a third option. She kept Mary as a prisoner in England, moving her from castle to castle, watching her every move. For 19 years, Mary remained a captive. But even in prison, she was dangerous. Catholics across Europe saw Mary as their true queen. Rebellions broke out in England in her name. Plots to assassinate Elizabeth surfaced again and again. And each time, Elizabeth hesitated: should she execute Mary and eliminate the threat, or would that make her look like a murderer? Then, in 1586, the final straw came. A secret letter, smuggled out of prison, changed everything. Mary had been caught conspiring with English Catholics to overthrow Elizabeth. The plan? Kill Elizabeth, place Mary on the throne, and restore Catholic rule. This was treason. Elizabeth had no more excuses. No more hesitation. On February 8, 1587, Mary, Queen of Scots, was beheaded. Even in death, she remained dramatic. Wearing a bright red gown, the Catholic color of martyrdom, she faced the axe with unwavering dignity. Her last words? A prayer for her son, James VI of Scotland, the very boy who would one day unite England and Scotland under one crown. After Mary's execution, Elizabeth claimed she never wanted it to happen. She even punished her secretary for sending the death warrant too quickly. But was her remorse real? Some historians believe Elizabeth genuinely felt guilty for executing a fellow queen and cousin. Others think it was an act, a clever way to shift responsibility while ensuring her biggest threat was eliminated. Either way, one thing was certain: the long, bitter rivalry between the two queens was over. And Elizabeth had won. Later years and death. Elizabeth's later years were marked by tragedy. Her once favorite, Robert Devereux, Earl of Essex, plotted to overthrow her. When his rebellion failed, she had him executed in 1601. She reportedly mourned him deeply. As her trusted friends and advisors passed away, Elizabeth sank into depression. In her final months, she spent days lying on cushions, refusing food or comfort. On March 24, 1603, Elizabeth I passed away at Richmond Palace at the age of 69. She never officially named a successor, but her advisors had already prepared for James VI of Scotland, Mary, Queen of Scots' son, to take the throne, uniting England and Scotland under one ruler. After her death, her counselors found a deeply personal letter among her belongings. It was from Robert Dudley, who had died in 1588. Even more touching was the note Elizabeth had written on it, his last letter to her. With Elizabeth's death, the Tudor dynasty, which had begun in 1485, came to an end. Though she never spoke publicly about her mother, Elizabeth privately honored Anne Boleyn's memory, keeping a portrait of her in a locket. Elizabeth remains one of England's longest reigning queens, ruling for 44 years. Her legacy endures as one of the most influential monarchs in British history. From a childhood overshadowed by scandal to a reign that defined an era, Queen Elizabeth I's story is one of power, intrigue, and resilience. But even the greatest rulers leave behind mysteries, like the final letter she cherished until her last breath. Was it a reminder of lost love, regret, or something more? One thing is certain, centuries later, Elizabeth's legacy still captivates the world. If you enjoyed this deep dive into history, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more fascinating